What's going on, guys? And welcome back to WWE Network and Chill, where every single week I, Graham GSM Matthews, break down all the content I watch in the WWE Network. Today we're talking the Goldberg WWE 24 special that aired last week after Raw on the WWE Network. Of course, every WWE 24 special the WWE Network has done over the course of the past 3.5 years has been really, really good. I have yet to see a bad 24 special. I've talked about a lot of them before. I have my list of notes right here of all the other 24 specials I've done. I talked about the Kurt Angle one they did over the summer. They had the Finn Balor one that went up after WrestleMania back in May. WrestleMania Monday, WrestleMania 30, WrestleMania 32, the Seth Rollins one. I'm not sure if I talked about the WrestleMania 31 one, but there's many more I have yet to review. The Goldberg one was no exception. This one was also excellent. Thoroughly enjoyed it. We'll be talking about it here today. So the first thing we hear Goldberg even say at the start of this special, which runs about an hour long, which is typical length for these WWE 24 specials, he goes, "It's so much fucking pressure, I can't even tell you." Those are his exact words, and he's talking about getting back in shape, physically, mentally, being the Goldberg of old. And not even that, but just ensuring that people see Goldberg as the Goldberg they remember him that he once was for many, many years ago. And he has to live up to those lofty standards of not only the fans, but the pressure that he puts on himself before he goes out there to perform and stuff. So, again, I'll talk about that soon enough. But we kick off the special with a clip of Goldberg on ESPN, which is really where all of this started. And they show clips of his early career in WCW. This was not a biography piece. This was not, Goldberg start to finish where he grew up and all this other stuff. I'm sure they've covered that before in past DVD releases. What this was merely talking about his WWE return. That's what I came here to say. And they wasted no time in talking about that. They very briefly talked about his initial run in WWE, which we'll talk about momentarily. But beyond that, no WCW talk, no how he grew up, when he used to play football. That's all well and good, but that was the time nor place for that. In this WWE 24 special. This was really all about his latest WWE run, and I'm glad they solely covered that. So anyway, they air the clip of Goldberg on ESPN with Jonathan Coachman where they planted the seeds for his ultimate return to WWE about a week and a half later, teasing the challenge of possibly facing Brock Lesnar. And Eric Bischoff talks about it. Like I said, they don't talk too much about WCW, but we do get a lot of Eric Bischoff in this documentary. They don't have a lot of people talking about Goldberg, but the people they brought in to talk about him were worth it, like Eric Bischoff, Triple H, and Vince McMahon. Those are the three people that know him probably more than anyone, in addition to obviously his wife and kids and stuff. His kid, I should say. He only has one son. But yeah, Eric Bischoff talks about his iconic WCW entrance. And Goldberg says, "I appeared out of nowhere and it kind of took off in WCW as my career did, going undefeated, going on to win the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, and so on and so forth." Eric Bischoff does admit that he was surprised to see Goldberg come to WWE in the first place. He always felt that Goldberg felt like an outsider during his original run in WWE, that the backstage politics and the travel, all this other shit, he never really felt fully welcome. He can never really call WWE his home. Though he does say, when talking with Jonathan Coachman on ESPN, that if there's anyone on the roster he would want to work with, it's Brock Lesnar. Now, it's funny he said that. Of course, that was designed to plant the seeds for a Survivor Series match with Brock Lesnar at the pay-per-view. And it wasn't just said out of random, and that's how they came up with the idea to do the match at the pay-per-view. That was obviously intentional. But it's funny that he said that, because I did talk to Goldberg myself. I had the awesome opportunity to interview him about almost exactly 2 years ago. It was Thanksgiving week in 2015. The full interview is up both here on the channel and on Wrestle Rant Radio, on iTunes, by the way, cheap plug, our full interview. And we didn't really talk a lot about wrestling. I didn't want to bother him with too many wrestling questions, but it was for the WWE section of Bleacher Report, so I had to ask wrestling questions. So I asked him if there was really anyone he would want to work with and if he kept tabs on wrestling. He said, if anyone, really just people that I keep in touch with would be Brock Lesnar. And he would be someone I would want to work with, despite the fact the WrestleMania 20 match was, by all accounts, by all intents and purposes, was a disaster. But he did say then he would want to work with Brock Lesnar, and he said it again there, and ultimately that match came to fruition. So November really is like the month of Goldberg, between me talking to him in November of 2015 and him winning Survivor Series, the main event of Survivor Series, and returning to the ring last November in the WWE 24 special airing in November this year. At any rate, so Paul Heyman goes on Raw the very next week, challenges Goldberg to come to Raw to face Brock Lesnar. And they talk about how his wife and kid had never seen him wrestle. And he talked about that for a few years before he came back to WWE. Now, I saw Goldberg in person for the first time at a Legends of Wrestling event, which I don't think they've done any more of since. It wasn't the greatest success, but it was a fun time. I think he actually put the event together, from what I understand, from what I remember him telling me. And he hit a spear on Scott Steiner that day, and he talked about, and he said in advertising and in hype and stuff like that for the event that that his wife and kid had never seen him wrestle. No, I'm sure they were there that day, but he didn't wrestle on that show. He had a spear and I think a jackhammer too, but he didn't wrestle, so he wanted to wrestle at least one more time, whether it be for WWE or someone else, just so his wife and especially his kid could see him wrestle. The family didn't know what to expect when they came to Raw in Denver for that Raw right before the Hell in a Cell pay-per-view. I think it was October 17th episode of Monday Night Raw, I believe it was. And then Lesnar was on Raw the next week in Minneapolis, and then Goldberg came back to Raw once again in Hartford the very next week, which I wish I could have been there for on Halloween, but I was at school in Boston. Anyway, so the family didn't know what to expect. They had never been backstage before at a WWE show, but they felt right at home, got to take pictures with all the superstars, talk with all the superstars. Everyone was very friendly. Before the show got underway and Goldberg would make his long-awaited return to Raw, Triple H went over the entrance with Goldberg, whether he still wants the pyro. Goldberg's like, we got to go all out, dude. Like, we got to do the pyro. I got to spit it out. You know that. I know that. That's what we got to do. So it's cool to kind of see that process. And I'm sure they were never the biggest fans of each other, dating back to 2003, 2004, when they had that feud over the world title. There was a lot of rumored heat between the two, and I'm sure that's very accurate. Triple H was not the easiest person to work with around that period of time when he was kind of stealing the spotlight from many other stars in the roster during the so-called reign of terror, as many other people like to call it, myself included. So I'm sure they were never too high on each other prior to just recently, but they do seem to get along during Goldberg's most recent tenure of the company. And of course, he admits that his last WWE stint did not end in storybook fashion. It ended at WrestleMania 20 in what was, again, for all intents and purposes, a terrible match with Brock Lesnar. And Eric Bischoff and Goldberg, they talk about how he's always separated himself from everyone else. He's kind of a loner, both in WCW and especially in WWE. And that kind of put heat on Goldberg because he wasn't all that friendly, supposedly, and he wouldn't introduce himself to everyone. He really didn't know how the business worked. He came right out of football, so can you really blame the guy? But that was just his personality, is that he's always really kept to himself. He doesn't really want to mingle with other people, but that put him in a bad light for a long time during not only his WCW tenure, but during his original stint in WWE from 2003 to 2004. He talks about said WrestleMania match with Brock Lesnar from WrestleMania 20. He said it wasn't a bad match. Now, Goldberg says this, it wasn't a bad match. It wasn't a crappy match. It was only crappy because no one gave it a chance. And then I think it was Jim Ross. I don't think Jim Ross was on this. Someone had talked about how, which is very accurate, the major reason why people booed that match was because we knew both guys were leaving. Brock Lesnar's contract was up. Goldberg's contract was up. Neither guy was renewing. So that crowd in New York, which has always been known to be a very hot, smart crowd, as you might call them, could you really expect anything less? But I don't know if I agree with Goldberg there. It was a pretty bad match. If you put that match in any other WrestleMania and the people did not know they were leaving, it was still a pretty fucking disappointing match. The build I thought was great, dating back to Survivor Series of 2003, and then their encounter at the Royal Rumble, then in No Way Out, and on Raws and SmackDowns. The build was really, really well done. It was pitting two seemingly unstoppable beasts and behemoths against each other, and then the match was mediocre at best. Like, if you call that a good match, I would recommend you get your eyes checked, because it really wasn't. Even taking away the crowd reaction, it really was not that good of a match, or at least not as good of it as it could have been based off the build. It was a major disappointment, to say the least. Even Michael Cole says it was a terrible WrestleMania memory. Now, he might be saying that because of the reaction, like Goldberg had said, and the reaction, which was why the match was so bad. But I don't know. I think if you put that match anywhere else in front of any other crowd that had no idea what was going on and was more of a casual audience and they had no idea either guy was leaving, I still think it would have been a disappointing match. But again, purely my opinion. He talks about being jaded when he left the company, how he reached out a few years before, or Triple H had talked about that he was jaded when he left the company in 2004, and that he had reached out a few times before he eventually came back. And I think it was, he didn't specify the years as to when they were in talks prior to 2016, but I do remember reading a report in early of 2014, again, take it for what it's worth, that Goldberg was in talks with the company to come in time for WrestleMania 30. Now, whether a match with Ryback would have come to fruition or whoever else, I doubt it, because Ryback by that point meant nothing. But there were talks of bringing in Goldberg for a match, I believe, and then talks died. I know people were rumoring, there were rumors that he might be at WrestleMania 32. I don't think that's what he was talking about. When Triple H said a few years before, I assume 2014 kind of fits within that time frame, because that's when I remember it being reported. And of course that fell through. And Triple H brought up that every single time conversation shut down between the two sides, it was because all that bad blood would simmer back to the surface. And that bad blood never really went away until Goldberg came back in 2016. So when he was backstage at Raw, I mean, he was interacting with all the superstars. He flat out told Luke Gallows, Luke was like, "Oh, we got to hang out sometime, grab a beer," and just Goldberg says, "It's Survivor and that's it. Survivor Series and that's it." And he shook everyone's hand, like I said. But even Goldberg knew it was. I don't think he was working people. I think he genuinely thought that would be a one and done type deal. It was reported by Dave Meltzer. Take it for what it's worth. But it was reported the day after Survivor Series that they came to terms on a new deal literally the day of Survivor Series, if not that weekend, but very likely that day. That's how WWE does things more often than not, is, changing creative plans the day of. So they talk about that and how Goldberg's WWE tenure was really only beginning as opposed to ending. But at any rate, Vince talks about now having a good relationship with Goldberg. They meet up before the pay-per-view and at Raw, and even before I get to Survivor Series, we'll talk about his Raw return first and the appearances he made along the way. But yeah, Vince talks about now having a good relationship with Goldberg, and Goldberg, that night when he came back on Raw, didn't know what the response would be from the audience. I'm not sure anyone knew what the response would be in Denver that night. Would they boo him? That's what he thought. He thought the crowd would boo him, but they also could have very likely just sat on their hands. Goldberg has been gone for 13 years. Now, he's been brought up before in video packages. He hasn't been Chris Benoit or anything, or hadn't been Chris Benoit before he came back to the company. But very rarely did they talk about Goldberg, and there was the reason for that, because he was on bad terms with the company. Why would they promote the guy? You know what I mean? So, it's very logical to think that he did not know what the response would be. And I don't think anyone did. Would they sit on their hands? Would they get a few mild cheers? He had no idea. Ultimately, though, it went off without a hitch. That return was one of my favorite, maybe not of all time, but definitely in recent memory. I really, really loved that return from Goldberg on Raw on October 17th of last year. I thought it really was perfect, and Goldberg felt the same way as well. His wife was in the crowd, his kid was in the crowd, of course, and his wife says, you could see the emotion on his face. And she cried when she saw the joy in his face when he was cutting that promo and interacting with the audience and interacting with his kid at ringside. And Vince hugged him when he got to the back. And Goldberg says it was the coolest thing I've ever done. And he felt very proud of that moment, and as he should. Again, it was a great promo. And I've never been the biggest Goldberg fan before he came back, but I was looking forward to seeing him back on Raw. That was my first time watching him on Raw in the near 10 years I've been a fan, because he hadn't appeared since 2004. And I thought he really had a great return. Again, for all intents and purposes, really went off without a hitch and went about as perfectly as you would hoped. Before we get to the next stage of the Survivor Series build, we get a quick look at Goldberg at home and how he's Goldberg in the ring, but at home he's just a dad, and how he cherishes that role. And you can really tell he loves his son and wife, which is cool. He kind of fits in that role perfectly. And he talks about this latest run in WWE, doing it for his son and for his wife. He's not doing it for me. He's not doing it for Goldberg. He's doing it for his son and his wife. And he says, for the first time in my wrestling career, first time probably ever, I'm not doing it for me. I'm like 16th on the totem pole now. It's not just me. It's about me. It's about my wife, my kid, and the animals and the goats and stuff they take care of. And he's not really that high up on the totem pole anymore. He did say, though, which was an interesting comment, which kind of fits in with other stuff he said in the past. I remember he was on the Edge and Christian podcast before WrestleMania saying something similar. He said, "I don't foresee myself having any fun during this process." Now, by that, what he means, it's not like he hated it in WWE during his latest run there. What he means is that, as I talked about earlier, he needed to get back to peak physical condition. He was already in great condition, let's face it. But with Goldberg, he's just on a completely different level. His character was almost godlike. It was this awesome aura that you really don't see these days. It's larger than life. That's what we got in WCW, to an extent in WWE as well. He felt like he needed to get back to that level for this run to work. And he made a promise to Vince that he was going to do this one match, and it was going to be a fucking spectacle. And he was very, very adamant about fulfilling that promise, about being the Goldberg of old. And in order to do that, he needed to work out and get in shape in a very short span of time. So even before we get to Survivor Series, like I said, he returned to Raw on the Halloween edition in 2016, about 2 weeks later, and he slipped in the segment with Rusev and Paul Heyman. He was about to jackhammer Rusev. He kneed him in the gut a few times before he hit his finisher, but in doing so, he slipped. And people were like, oh shit, he's already back and he's already fucking botching. This is already going to be a disaster. Not everybody, but I do remember some people complaining about that. And Goldberg, being a perfectionist, he says outright that pissed him off. That pissed him off when he slipped because he wants everything to go perfect. I'm very much the same way. I would have been pissed off too. I mean, the guy just came back and he's already slipping. And the spear itself looked good, and the jackhammer, the spear on Paul Heyman and the jackhammer looked good, but he just can't get over that one moment. He was adamant about everything going perfectly from that moment forward. He says the mental anguish is from second to second. It's not even a day-to-day basis thing. It's from second to second, because before he goes out for every single appearance and when he's home and he's training, he needs to get back to that peak physical condition. It's a physical toll, it's a mental toll, and it's taking its toll on Goldberg throughout this entire process, which is why he does not foresee himself having any fun throughout the entire process. And he talks about all the pressure, and he can't deal with the pressure, and it's not the people putting pressure on him, it's Goldberg putting pressure on Goldberg. And that's really what he's trying to deal with throughout this entire process and being back in WWE. Like I had said, he had to get back in shape in a very short period of time before Survivor Series, made the aforementioned promise to Vince, and on Raw, literally days before the pay-per-view, I think I read this somewhere, I'm almost positive because it sounded familiar, that he tore his shoulder. He said rotator cuff, you might have just heard it. I don't know if he tore it, because I don't think they would have let him wrestle the following week if he did. But in clotheslining one of the security guards over the top rope on that go-home segment for the pay-per-view on Raw days earlier, he hurt his shoulder, and he's like, oh, fuck, that's not a good sign. But he worked through it. He does media leading up to the pay-per-view. He says, I question my ability to pull this off, at least at 49 years old. Because the guy's not a young up-and-comer anymore. He's a fucking 49-year-old man. And for a guy that has not been in the ring, by and large, in over a dozen years, you never really know what you're going to get. And Vince admits he had something to prove, and he did that at Survivor Series. Now, I talked about it in my Survivor Series review, that at the time I was not the biggest fan of it. I just thought it was a dumb decision. Now, it put Goldberg on another level, and because they couldn't have had him lose and then come back to do another match. He had to win here. I just thought it was a waste of Brock Lesnar's dominant run of 3 years, but again, it made Goldberg a hot commodity, for the next 4 months, and winning the championship and just being on this completely different stratosphere compared to everyone else in the roster. Now, that speaks volumes of what they think of the current guys and how they don't feel special, unlike a Brock Lesnar or a Goldberg. But for Goldberg's sake, it did him a lot of good, and winning that match in 90 seconds, it got this insane reaction. And again, from a fan standpoint, was not what I would have done if I was booking the thing, if I was the booker, if I was booking this pay-per-view. But from a Goldberg standpoint, from a Goldberg fan standpoint, from a human standpoint, taking myself out of this for a second, it was a great moment for Goldberg. And he said that it was worth it. And it felt so good to be that Goldberg of old in just slaying Brock Lesnar, not only for himself, but again for his wife and kid who were at ringside. The wife admitted that her parents were there and they were crying and everyone was happy. It was a really, really cool moment. He was excited to have had that opportunity backstage afterward with his wife and kid. He was talking about it. And Vince had said that win put him back into character. It got him back in Goldberg mode. That 90-second squash. That was the Goldberg we remembered from WCW. Not the Goldberg that was putting on lackluster matches with Triple H and Brock Lesnar in 04 and 03. That was the Goldberg we wanted, that we fucking needed in WWE the first time. But we didn't get that. And we got it this time around, which was awesome. So Vince had talked about that they were open to more after the one-night deal before the new contract was signed. And ultimately, they extended the deal through WrestleMania, and they thought there was something there, and it paid off. Went on to win the championship, the Universal title, at the Fastlane show. Again, his wife and kid were there. And he said he had a fun time removing himself from the process and watching his family's reactions to what he was doing in that ring. It was, again, a very arduous process, mentally and physically, emotionally. But being able to see, his wife and kids see him do what he once did and see him in that light, which they had never before had done prior to this stint in WWE, was really, really cool for him. And you could tell that he was very proud of himself for getting back in peak physical condition just so his wife and kid could see him do his thing from back in the day. So again, he says he needed redemption from WrestleMania 20 after it ended in a very awful note. After that match with Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania 20 left a very sour taste in his mouth. So he arrives at WrestleMania. He sees Undertaker. We get the full interaction, which is really cool. Undertaker out of character for a very rare instance on a WWE show. We see them talking back and forth, and he says he wants to enjoy the moment. For the first time in his career, he's going to enjoy the moment, which he's never done before. And he says, to Taker, have fun, be safe out there, great to see you, love you, man. Which was really cool to see that interaction, because you probably knew they never had a one-on-one match. They did have an interaction at Raw a few months earlier, before the Rumble, if I remember correctly. But beyond that, he says he wanted to enjoy the moment, and, you could tell they were good friends from Goldberg's original stint in WWE many years earlier. And he admits he's looking forward to facing Brock. He's excited. I mean, it's been a tough road in getting back in condition and staying in that peak physical condition, as I said, but he's looking forward to facing Brock. And again, he went out smiling. He talked to Triple H right before he went out, and he's like, dude, I'm fucking pumped. I am ready. Have you ever seen a smile on my face before I've gone out there before? And Triple H is laughing too, like, no, I haven't. Like, it's great to see. And the match was great. I really, really enjoyed that match. Now, was it a 20-minute instant classic, an instant match classic, hold for hold wrestling masterpiece? No. But for what it was, a physical brawl, an exciting brawl, just you never really knew what was going to happen. And again, I didn't love the first match that lasted 90 seconds, but it worked perfectly here. It worked absolutely perfectly because you thought there was a chance Goldberg might win. And there were reports heading into the show, and we might keep the belt on Goldberg just to swerve some people. So you didn't really know. And I'm not sure if anyone's ever kicked out of the jackhammer before Brock Lesnar. Maybe one or two people. But it was a pretty cool moment when Brock Lesnar kicked out of that. You thought that was it for Brock Lesnar and that Goldberg had the match won, that he was going to retain the title, but he didn't. Brock Lesnar kicked out and being there again. So watching this footage was awesome for me because I was there at that WrestleMania and it was really fucking cool to relive that. I really enjoyed that match personally. Probably one of my favorite matches of the night, to be quite honest with you. And he says, again, he had fun. For the first time in his career, he had fun. And it might very well be his last match. So he went out on top. A complete 180 from where he was at WrestleMania 13 years earlier. Michael Cole praised the WrestleMania match, like I said, calling it very physical, very exciting, and one of the most exciting and physical matches he's ever called in his entire career. Now, I'm not sure about that, but it was a lot of fun, to say the least. So he came out on Raw the next night. It aired after Monday Night Raw. It aired on the WWE Network, talking about his run of the company. And the fans kind of gave him some grief at first. I mean, it's the post-WrestleMania crowd. Can you really expect anything less? But once he started talking about his son and his wife and doing it for them and how proud he felt when he was able to bring that Universal Championship belt to his son's school and see the expression of elation on their faces and stuff like that was really fucking cool for him to talk about, and the crowd gave him the respect he deserved. It was an awesome promo, again, which is hilarious because Goldberg has never been a great promo, but that promo was straight from the heart. You could tell that was not scripted. That was Goldberg being Goldberg, and he would take a few shots at the crowd when they were kind of giving him shit, and he had a short temper, but they came around, they gave him the respect he deserved. It was an awesome, awesome, perfect way for Goldberg to go out. And he said it was like a goodbye, which is always tough, but I went out my way, and for that, he's forever grateful. So it was an awesome ending to what I thought was a spectacular documentary. Quick note real quick. The song they played at the end was called The Adventure by Angels and Airwaves. So I might have to download that on my phone because that was a great song and was a perfect song to sum up the entire Goldberg journey from coming back to WWE in October of 2016 and seemingly wrapping up over WrestleMania weekend in 2017. So I thought this special was awesome. Again, really in line with all the other WWE 24 specials. The three that I was really looking forward to that they promoted and teased many months ago was the Finn Balor one, the Kurt Angle one, and the Goldberg one. The Balor one went up in May, like I said. The Angle one went up in July, I think. And this one obviously just aired now. So I think they have another Hardy Boys one being made, which I can't wait to watch. I know they're coming out with a DVD, but I'm pretty sure they're coming out with a 24 special too. That was teased months ago. So that's definitely out in 2018. But this was great. I really enjoyed the Goldberg one. Absolutely go out of your way to check it out on the WWE Network. Like I said earlier, about an hour in length, but it breezes by just like that because it was a lot of fun. You see that emotion from Goldberg that you never really thought you would see before. Great interviews with Triple H, Vince McMahon, his wife, Eric Bischoff, who I did not expect to see on this thing. They probably got him over WrestleMania weekend or something because he was there obviously for the Hall of Fame. But you see Taker out of his element, Brock Lesnar, Paul Heyman. We got a lot of cool comments from Paul Heyman. So it was cool. It was really, really cool. I love this one a lot. So definitely check it out on the WWE Network when you get a chance. That being said, folks, WWE Network and Chill will be back tomorrow right here on the channel with my review of Total Divas Season 7, Episode 3 that aired this past Wednesday on the E! Network. So stay tuned for that on Monday, that edition of WWE Network and Chill. Whatever airs on the WWE Network tomorrow night after Raw, I will talk about here on WWE Network and Chill next Sunday. If nothing airs, if it's like a story time again, which are always enjoyable, but there's really nothing to review there, then we'll just throw up an interview or an old episode of Wrestle Rant Radio or something here on the channel next Sunday. But as I record this, of course, as this goes up, Survivor Series is tonight. So if you're listening to this on Sunday, guys, enjoy Survivor Series tonight. I'll be back, tomorrow with an all-new WWE Network and Chill, so stay tuned for that and more content here on the channel. So like the video, drop a comment, share the video, and subscribe to the channel for more daily content. I'm Graham Matthews, guys. Enjoy Survivor Series tonight, and I'll catch your ass down the road.